Good morning. Welcome to Archaia Epidavros, or Palaia Epidaurus, meaning ancient or old, Palaia as in paleontology. But I'm exploring today, and this is one both for the history buffs and for the tourists, because you can come here and have a fantastic holiday. But this is also overlooked for its history, largely because of the place nearby. Let's have a look. So here I am to the west of Archaia Epidavros, and this is a natural harbour on the eastern coast of the Peloponnese. This town, this village, dates back 2,500 years, maybe over there. You can see the Roman theatre built in about 400 BC. So this place is old, but it's older than you might think it is. I'm on the hill here, not just for this fantastic view over the harbour, which is why this place exists in the first place, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but also because here on the hill we have behind me a Temple of Artemis. Now, this ancient Hellenic temple may not look like much nowadays, a pile of rocks, a few walls and so on, but again, this is 4th or 5th century BC. This is 2,500 years old, and they were worshipping Artemis, the god of the hunt, here long before I was here, long before most of the town that we see below us was here, but 1,000 years after this town was established. And this is a fantastic place. I mean, you can see typical layout. I don't see any evidence of columns or pillars. It was probably a large stone building with some sort of tiled roof. Again, I don't see evidence of tiles, but who knows? And there were certainly several rooms here. But this temple would have dominated the aspect of the harbour. You would have seen it on this hill, assuming the trees had been cut down, and I'm sure they were, from miles away as you came into this harbour, into this town. And it was a show of opulence and wealth, because this place was wealthy. But before we talk about why it was wealthy, before we go down and have a look at the ancient theatre and the Roman ruins over there, let's talk about this place 1,000 years before, during Mycenaean times. So at the foot of this hill, with the Temple to Artemis on the top, the temple built in about 500 BC, we have something, I think, which is astounding, and it's these rock cuts. These are rock cut graves dating from about 1500 BC, so 1,000 years before the Hellenic era, 1,000 years before the Temple of Artemis, and almost 1,300 years before the Romans came here and built the theatre on the hill over there that we see. And that isn't the famous Theatre of Epidaurus, let me say. We'll come to that in a minute. But the Mycenaeans were here. And why were they here? They were here because of this natural harbour. And the Mycenaeans had a fantastic military network of roads which connected Mycenae and their major port city of Tiryns with Epidavros, and it allowed them to defend and control this area. The Arkadiko bridge, one of my favourite little monuments in Greece, the oldest bridge in the world, is part of that Mycenaean military road network, and it was built specifically to allow the Mycenaeans to get messages, troops, communication down here quickly. If someone said, look, we've got some people coming to the harbour, we don't know who they are, the Mycenaeans would be here to meet them and defend this place. And that's originally why this place existed, because of this natural harbour and because of its strategic importance to the Mycenaeans in protecting their territory. And they had to bury their dead, and they buried their dead in this Mycenaean cemetery dating to 1,500 years before the birth of Christ. So the Mycenaeans cut these emblematic rock-cut shafts into the bedrock itself, and then at the end they created these rooms where they buried their dead. And I am exploring here. I don't know what's in here. I haven't been in here. It's a little bit scary. But this is where the Mycenaeans, 1,500 years ago, were burying their dead. And I'm going to try and get a couple of photos inside, because I'm sure it's not coming out on the camera properly. But this, to me, is Greece. This is Greece 3,500 years ago, 1,000 years before Christ. Now, 1,000 years, pretty well 1,000 years, after the Mycenaeans were here, militarising and defending this amazing natural harbour here, the Hellenic Greeks in about 600 BC, right at the beginning really of Hellenic Greece, started to establish a cult of Asclepios, and they established it about 10 kilometres from here at a place now known as Ancient Epidavros, famous of course for its enormous well-preserved theatre, which hosts the Epidavros Theatre Festival every summer. And it's an enormous theatre. It's 14,000 people. But because of the existence of the Asclepion, and the Asclepion was a spa town, effectively people were going there to be healed. The elderly, the infirm, those who had long-term ailments were turning to the god Asclepios. Asclepios was the god of healing in Greece. They were turning to the god for healing. And they were going up to the cult of Asclepios, and ultimately it became a very successful commercial enterprise. And 200 years after they established it, in about 400 BC, about the same time as the theatre here, they built the theatre in Epidaurus. It was one of the very last things to be built. But how were the people getting to ancient Epidaurus? Well, quite simple. They were coming to this harbour. And so this town became incredibly rich, because you can imagine the boats coming here from Athens, from Turkey, as it is nowadays, from Italy, to bring the infirm, to bring the ill, to bring those who were on pilgrimage to see Asclepios to ancient Epidaurus. And it built this town again, beyond that of the Mycenaean fortress that existed here previously. And up on the hill there, above the theatre, where we're going to go now, there is a little Acropolis. Just before we go up there, while we're tracking ancient Greece, Hellenic Greece, Greece of 400-500 BC, this church here, this Byzantine church, I think it's St. Nicholas, is built on an old Hellenic temple, a temple to Hera. And this happens so often, I've seen it so often in Greece, where the Christian church, when it establishes itself, builds on top of old temples. If anything, to make a point, I guess, to the local population. We are now the dominant religion here. So, on my way up to the Acropolis, here in ancient Epidaurus, we come across this, which is an ancient church, thought to be 4th or 5th century AD. We're facing due east here, so this would have been the altar end, and you can see, ruined now, but this was the Church of St. Mary. And I just find it astonishing that, you know, we were up on the hill looking at the Temple of Artemis, which was a previous religion from about 1500 BC. Then we jump forward 1,000 years to this church, which is still just as ruined, and still 1,500 years from where we are now. And then, of course, we were looking at the Mycenaean tombs, which were 3,500 years ago. It just demonstrates, and by the way, we are exploring, we're in the middle of nowhere here, it just demonstrates the history of this port town of Epidaurus. And then you've got this fantastic view over the harbour here, an old Epidaurus. And there on the hill, I don't know if you can see it, that's where we were. That's where the Temple of Artemis was. You can just about make it out up there. So this place really suffers, in my opinion, from its proximity to Epidaurus, because although it was built more recently during Hellenic and Roman times on the prosperity of Epidaurus, the theatre, the Asclepion, the site of healing, it's now eclipsed by it, and I struggle to find any information, to be honest, about the history here. A lot of what I'm talking about I've pieced together just from reading, from looking at what's here, and from my knowledge of Greece, which I have no formal qualification in. I can't claim that any of this is accurate, but it seems to make some sense. So, oh my God, the views here. This is why you want to come here as a tourist, not for this climb, because there are some beautiful beaches here. We came here in 2006. We stayed for 2 weeks. We rented a villa, actually up on the hill there, I think, one of those villas there. And my daughter was about 3, and it was perfect. Quiet beaches. It's only 2 hours from Athens. It's an easy drive. You can see a beach over there, and I'd highly recommend it, particularly if you've got young children. You get the best of the Greek summer without it becoming particularly rowdy or anything like that. And it's really, really nice here. And here we can see, on the promontory here, you can see why they built it there, the Church of St. Nicholas, and underneath that church, the Temple of Hera. So there's so much history here. Let's go and look at the Acropolis. I keep saying we're going to. And not as exciting, but as we keep going up the trail, pretty well to the pinnacle of the hill, before the Acropolis, we come to the modern Church of St. Mary. So the church doesn't want to let this hill go. So just past the church, we come to the Acropolis. Now, Acropolis means high fortress or something like that in Greek. But was this ever a fortress? I'm not sure. We have here the remains of a Roman bathhouse, believe it or not. In Roman times, this place underwent a renaissance. In about the 2nd century BC, they loved Asclepios. And in the 2nd century BC, the Romans really started coming here. And you can imagine this harbour would have been hugely busy again. And they built most of what we now see. And there was a bathhouse here. It was a pleasure ground, pleasure gardens. I hate to think there would have been far more tourists here than are ever here nowadays, I'm sure. But they were going to Asclepios, and they were going to Ancient Epidavros, the theatre. Nero went there actually in, I think, 67 AD. But here we have a Roman bathhouse. Very difficult to see nowadays. This was the interior. There would have been, I guess, a floor above it. There probably would have been a hypercaust, you know, heated floor, baths, etc. Hell of a view though. Nice view. Not a bad view for a bathhouse. You can see again the beaches I was talking about. Fantastic, the road that you take. But there is evidence, in my opinion, that this was older. You look at these rocks here, they're Hellenic, in my opinion. And some of the foundations take on a different appearance. But, you know, Roman building was bricks and mortar. You can see here. And then you get down here, yes, there's some mortar. But these are not bricks. So I think there was probably a Hellenic Acropolis here, maybe fortified, because they participated in the Peloponnesian War. Epidaurus was actually its own district. It was separate, for example, to Argos. It was like a mini city-state in itself. And they participated in the Peloponnesian War and sided with Sparta. And as a result, the Athenians sent their navy here, and they blockaded the harbour. So this was not always a peaceful place. In Hellenic times, it went back perhaps to some of its Mycenaean usage, a military installation, a port for defence and military use, as well as commercial use. You can see a little church here. I mean, it's fantastic, tiny little Acropolis. So now here, finally, we see the Roman Theatre of Epidaurus. And this is not the big theatre, as I said. This theatre, and I mean, it's fantastic. I think in some ways it's better than the other one because the views are just astonishing. But this theatre was built about 400 BC, about the same time as the big one at Epidavros, which holds 14,000 people. This one holds 2,000 people. But it demonstrates for me that people were coming through here. This was a place where people were using as a gateway, effectively, to go to the healing centre at Ancient Epidavros, where the big theatre is, and where the Asclepion was, and where the hospital was. This place was buzzing, and it had money as a result. Interestingly enough, over here, in the water, there is a sunken city. They call it the Old Epidavros, and you can snorkel it, you can dive it. Now, it's not actually a city. It's an ancient Roman villa from about the 6th century. In the 6th century AD, there were 2 enormous earthquakes here, and they leveled this place, and the coastline actually sunk into the sea by 5 or 6 feet. The whole of southern Greece is gradually sinking into the sea, and the north is lifting up. But the villa, which can now be explored underwater, was sunk as a result of that earthquake and is over there. Now, just across from the Roman theatre here, we have more Roman ruins, again, behind a lovely fence. And I assume that these were in support, probably, of the Roman theatre itself. It was a commercial enterprise in the end, and they probably had places for food, places for sleep, maybe even a brothel, I hate to say it, but probably true in that time. And they were probably here. But these ruins are newer than the theatre. The theatre, as I said, 4th century BC. These were about 2nd century BC, as was the bathhouse on the hill. So you can see the place developed commercially, and as they could afford more, they bought more. But there's so much to see here. I love it. Now, as I said, Epidavros is also great should you want to holiday in Greece for a week or 2 weeks, get away from it a little bit and yet be close to Athens. We're 2 hours from Athens here. As I said, 2006, I came here, I holidayed, we hired a villa, it was fantastic, we had a pool. But there are beaches as well. If you follow this path round this headland, there are 2 fantastic beaches. The one in front of us is probably the best one, known as Kalamaki Beach. I don't know if you can see it there because I'm not going to go all the way round to that one. And the other one, which is on the way round, is also very nice. So we'll just go around and have a look at that quickly. So in the summer, you can come down here. This is an organised beach. You can sit on a sunbed, buy a drink and sit here all day. The water is fantastic. It's very shallow. It's great for young children. You don't need to worry about them too much here. It's a bit pebbly, but kids tend to love that. And the advantage is you don't get sand everywhere. There is parking here should you wish to come. And it's not the only beach, as I said. There's another beach around there. I think there are goats on it at the moment. I don't know if you can get that. the goats on the beach over there, Kalamaki Beach, and then over where the Sunken Villa is, the Sunken Roman Villa, there's another fantastic beach, bigger than this, sandier than this. So you have your choices here. But as I said, for tourists who come down here, it's a relaxed pace of life. It doesn't get frenetic like the islands in the summer. It's 2 hours drive from Athens, relatively easy drive. If you have young kids, if you want to get away from it, if you want a bit of Greek life, because there'll be a lot of Greeks here in the summer, then this is the place to come. It's just beautiful. And I can recommend it because I have stayed here with my wife and with my family. There's nowhere better, genuinely, than the Peloponnese in Greece. Underrated, underutilised, and always here. Well, I hope you've enjoyed my little look at Archaia Epidavros. What can I say? 3,500 years of history, going right the way through from the Mycenaeans to the Hellenic Greeks, to the Romans, to the Byzantines, and modern day. This natural harbour, 2,000 years ago, would have been filled with boats and amazing. If you go to its bigger brother neighbour, the Epidaurus Theatre, 10 kilometres from here, make the effort to come here. Come afterwards. Use a taverna. Maybe stay the night. Maybe stay a week. You won't regret it. And to see the whole story of Epidaurus, you have to come here, because the theatre and the Asclepion is only a little part of it. Everyone who went there came through here first. I hope you've enjoyed. Look at my other videos and I will do some more soon. Thank you.